of them, like probably close to several hundred in the US. In the world, there's multi-thousand of them, that they are effectively using the devices from us or from the legacy technologies, that they are running the samples on it, and then they're providing the results back to the CLIA-CAP certified labs. So still, you don't need to have FDA approval for those. Pharma, you don't need that one as well. If one day we want to get this machine in the hand of doctors directly or at homes, then you get the 510K approvals on those. And of course, in the applications, when it comes to food testing, when it comes to agricultural biology, environmental, or forensics, depends on the cases, you may or may not need the specific approvals for that.
Terrific, thank you. Just want to check, is the audio good for everyone in the back? Excellent, thank you. Martin, let's hear your medtech story. What brought you into the sector? I know you're fairly new to Outset, but take us back a bit.
Certainly not new in the world of medical technology. I had been working for almost a couple of decades in med technology companies, large capitalization companies, the likes of Becton Dickinson, Abbott, Smith Medical, and Integer. And on my most recent large cap job, I had an opportunity to exit. And I think at that point, I thought that probably was a good time for me to explore and try to find a space where I could be more impactful, right? And I thought that there were a number of spaces in which, I had not seen innovation driving improved quality of life or reduce costs of provision of healthcare. And one of those spaces was dialysis. Right? To me, it was puzzling to learn that around 6% of the Medicare budget goes into treating 1% of the population. The costs are astronomical, right? Almost 500,000 people suffer from end-stage renal disease. Each one of them is costing to the government around $70,000, $75,000 per year. And the quality of care is not up to par or to expectations. And we can say that the innovation has been lacking for at least 2 or 3 decades. To me, it was puzzling to know that how come nobody has looked at this space.
Yeah, it's puzzling, and is it daunting? You're thinking no one's disrupted it because it cannot be disrupted? Or is it, again, you're just scratching your head like this is something that needs to happen now? You can look at it 2 different ways, I guess.
Right. I think there were a number of incentives were missing in the space, right? But I think it was kind of like a perfect storm in the forming, right? I think that the government at some point realized that it was untenable, unsustainable to maintain the same trend. And as of recently, with the new executive order, for example, that is dealing with ways to improve kidney health, that's kind of like a sign of things are changing, right? And we had probably a few players that tried to change the game in terms of creating new systems and introducing new technology in machines that are probably 2 or 3 decades old. But when you talk about the big companies that dominate the space, and there's probably 2 or 3 that dominate probably 70, 80% of the market. One of them is a German company, another one is a US company, et cetera, right? So there are 2 or 3 players that dominate the space. And I think for me, it was interesting to learn that these companies have become kind of like the victims of their own success. With installed bases that probably are in the 200,000 to 300,000 systems out there, 6,000 clinics, footprints, et cetera, for these companies to move into a space that drives innovation is kind of like a challenging proposition, right? How do you go back and revamp an install base that is 200,000 or 300,000 systems, right? And 6,000 clinics, right? So there was kind of like almost an incentive to slow down innovation, right? To maintain profitability, because it's never a good quarter for a public company to make that sort of transition. So I thought this is probably a game that is going to be played in the startup world, right? And there's going to be a company out there that's going to have the solution, right? And that is going to transform the dynamics of this market. I did a little bit of research and found that there were probably 3 players in the world that had kind of like this type of technology and momentum and the backing of investors, right? And I thought, one of them here in Northern California being Outset, right? And I thought that their approach was very interesting. I think this is a company that came up with a kind of like a different approach to the design of a traditional dialysis machine, right? It's much more of a consumer product. The system does not look like a medical device at all. It looks like a dorm fridge. It is not intimidating, right? It's almost like inviting to interact with. The company had invested time and effort developing a user interface that facilitated greatly the learning curve, and that also invited actually the patient to perform their own therapy, which is kind of like a novelty, right? In this space. The other thing that was new on this system is that it had the capacity to produce dialysis solution on demand. And for those of you that may not be aware, but if you suffer from end-stage renal disease, you're bound to a clinic. You're going to be at that clinic 3 times per week, and every time you go to the clinic, you're using probably 25 to 30 gallons of dialysis solution per treatment. So imagine trying to do this at home. How do you prepare that much dialysis solution to perform your treatments? Well, so it's kind of simple, right? Let's make sure that the system can actually produce that solution on demand. Now, easier said than done, right? In order to do that, you need to basically equip the machine with a water purification system that deals with the capacity, with the needs required for the therapy. But anyway, this company had that technology in place. It had the user interface, and it had a high degree of connectivity, wireless data exchange connectivity approved by the FDA, which to me was kind of like puzzling, right? I spent 5-6 years trying to gain wireless connectivity for a platform I was managing at Becton Dickinson. It was kind of like a torturous path. And this company, suddenly I found that they had already approval from the FDA, and they were already leveraging this dual exchange data capability with the cloud, extracting an enormous amount of data, dealing with the system performance, but potentially with clinical data related to the patients, right? So I think it was kind of like they were touching the tip of the iceberg on that front. So that captured my attention. I felt that my background could be conducive to scale the company. I felt that the company investors, syndicate of investors, were in for the mid and long term. So I think that there was no like 2-year quick exit type of mentality. It was more like, how do we make sure that this company, beyond going public, is sustainable and profitable over the mid and long term? And I think those were the things that attracted me to this space. Again, no regrets. It's been 2 years. In outset years, as I mentioned, it's like dog years. It's probably like more like 14 years, but things are going well.
That's great. And this has been said before, and I'll say it again. We've got a nice, comfortable room here. I can see you all. If someone has a question, please raise your hand. I'm sure we can have an exchange back and forth. I don't need to be asking all the questions. So let's talk a bit about, if you don't mind, going back to the Tablo. What was this quote-unquote secret sauce that enabled you to turn these massive pieces of equipment into something the size of a dorm fridge? What's the secret?
Right. So the company was born back in 2005, 2006, with the collaboration of an academic institution, University of Oregon, a PD, a product development firm, and some very entrepreneurial engineers. And I think the concept was that there was some water purification technology, filtration technology that could help the company make a much more compact version of a water purification plant required to deal with that capacity, right? So I think that's how the company was born. And I think over time, I think we evolved that platform and were able to pack that water purification plant along with the dialysis machine into a box that is 2/3 the size of a traditional system without the water purification capability. So to me, that's kind of like the first secret sauce is how compact and how capable the system is. It's basically the way we refer to it is kind of like a clinic on wheels, right? So I think that was the first novelty. The second one to me was like the user interface. I mean, to me, that's probably what gives Outset an advantage over the competition, where it's still generating user interface in the traditional fashion, right? Which are designed with an audience of clinical training in mind, right? The people that are operating these devices are clinically trained professionals, right? I think the approach that Outset took was, what if we design the interface with the patient in mind, right? And by the way, if you're not a patient, if you're a clinician, you can skip all of this easy interface and go into the settings that are for professionals. So I think that was kind of like a big differentiator, right? And the third one, again, is the data, availability of data, and what do we do with the data, right? I mean, to me, that's kind of like a great problem to have, right? And you can solve cost of service when you're talking about capital equipment, when you're talking about a large installed base. The cost to service the equipment in the field could become astronomical over time. And it could be like, the top 3 items of your P&L, right? Cost drivers. So if you can use the analytic capabilities of the system and generate algorithms that can help you to detect the onset of an electromechanical failure, right? And send an intervention over the air before this failure happens, I mean, you're talking about significant reduction in cost of service for that platform. And that could be by itself a big differentiating factor. The other thing is that if you're a patient of dialysis, right, your prescription is kind of like adjusted on a weekly basis or bi-weekly basis, right? And that leads to fluctuations, right, in the quality of life of the patient, right? You're either over or under treatments, right, or extraction of fluids or toxins, etc., right? So you're always trying to catch up. What if through the data that is generated by the machine, you could adjust your therapy on a real-time basis, right? I mean, for sure, at least you could deal with some of the symptoms, right? It includes headaches, colics, etc., right? Which deal with over-extraction of fluids from your system, right? So again, those are the things that we are exploring and makes us excited about it.
That's terrific. Hesaam, let's talk a bit about your device. Let's talk about the tech and what it's able to do, but let's also get a little bit into design. I think that was one thing I know it was one thing I wanted to hit upon was how you're building these products to really appeal to patients, but also to the customers who, frankly, don't want to have the big box anymore. They want to have the Keurig machine on the countertop.
Sure. We were trying to take a very different approach than the historical approach. And as I mentioned, that historically has been optical-based systems with a laser and camera and scanner and robots and whatnot. And then we're taking a so-called 180-degree shift toward using a semiconductor chip and then using semiconductor and marrying the technology with biology. I mean, when we're looking at, first of all, biology is massively more complex than physical sciences. Like the amount of information and data, and then the challenges around that one is like orders of magnitude more than physical devices. Like in the physical devices, you measure the conductivity of silicon once, and then you basically change the temperature, you change the dope of the NNP, and you measure that, and you have a table, and then from here you can design chips, you can design transistors. But when it comes to biology, like the level of complexity is huge, it's massive. Like you're talking about DNA, there's like ATCGs. When you're talking about proteins, like each amino acid has 78, ATCGs so-called in it. And if you basically look at the combination, 2 to the 20 goes to the various type of these. And like the numbers just astronomically goes up. And there's no longer, we're talking about just a simple file that you can have it in Excel and you can really manage that. But at the same time, we're really living in the world of biology. We are in the whim of the molecular world. We have more cells in our body than, we have 38 trillion cells in our body. We have about 100 trillion microbes in our gut. Like everything around us is made of biology. The cotton on my shirt, the coffee I'm drinking, the leather of the watch, like everything. And this information, which are extremely high resolution biology, high resolution information, impacting our lives, that we are pretty blind to it. We do not have easy access to be able to read this information. And to me, we are in a very unique time in history for the first time that we can potentially tackle this high-resolution biology problem by the sensors. First of all, the sensing capabilities advanced quite a bit. The type of systems and the chip, I mean, I literally brought one of our systems in this bag with us, which is make it very different. This is my wallet.
It's tiny.
This is the device, which is quite tiny, right? So you can see that this is you can carry it next to your laptop, essentially, and this is the smallest laptop that Apple made. So, and then here is the semiconductor chip that you have. So in this chip, you have 144 million sensors, which is quite amazing to imagine that today we can have technologies, and this is not even a state-of-the-art technology from the semiconductor standpoint. We still have the whole Moore's law to drive beyond these. And you have 144 million sensors sitting next to each other in a biosensor array, which is a pretty powerful electronic sensor, each of them measuring a little impedance above that sensor, which we're using it for detecting ATCGs, which are 1.3 angstrom apart, very high resolution. But actually, you can use it for tons of other things. You can use it for protein detection. You can use it for live single cell monitoring. And you can think about what it can bring to the world of drug discovery and development if I can have a live cell and can inject different, monitor the impact of various drugs on that. I think these type of capabilities are very new. These type of chip back in 1990s, if we wanted even to make that chip, we could not, and probably that cost $10,000. And today, this chip costs like fully packaged for us, like in a range of tens of dollars. I'm not going to give the exact cogs of the chip, but it's very inexpensive. And you can make these in hundreds of thousands, in millions, in billions if needed, with the same fabs that they're making our iPhone. This is a unique, opportunity, I believe, that we have sensing capability that enables so-called tackling and reading high-resolution biology. So that's one aspect that has been quite amazing. And we are very much focused on the forefront of taking advantage of some conductor capabilities and sensing. The other part related to what Martin also said is actually computation capabilities. Again, when we're looking at the biology, we are entering a decades era of genomics, which revolutionized many industries. Healthcare is one of them, but like it's way beyond healthcare, from pharmacogenomics to food testing to forensics. I mean, every day you open up, one of the news, CNN or whatever you like, you can see that there's a news that they found something about a 40 years old crime matter that DNA technology helped finding the bad guy. Or like you see that there's somebody figured out like who is two cousins that they had in different countries and whatnot. We see like anecdotal examples of these, but imagine that you have a box that actually would be in every police station or in every airport that can really track in a much, much higher resolution than images or fingerprints and whatnot. That's really the power of when it comes to genomics. And for that, we also need, given the amount of information we're dealing with, we need the computational capabilities. Historically, that didn't exist. I remember first time I went to Stanford Genome Center back in 2004 when I started my project. There was a roll of a paper from the roof. Basically, you go close to it, it's written as ATCCAG. And I was asking Ron Davis, like, what is this? And he said that this is the historical first yeast genome ever sequenced. I said, wow, so that's very powerful. And the second question was that, well, this clearly is not written or printed by a computer, it's a typewriter. So how do you know there was no mistake? How could you compare two of them? And he laughed and said, well, we couldn't. We couldn't really compare two of them together because there was no computational capabilities. They were not like, this is 1991. Mm-hmm. So today, thanks to all of the advancement in the field of computation, to the people who made cloud computing, et cetera, available, we can collect with these type of gadgets or otherwise, you can have these things around and collect the data in a matter of minutes and hours. This data go to one central repository and you can just do basically comparison and statistical analysis in a way that never was possible before. So we are entering an era similar to what happened in the computer industry, that first there was these big mainframe computers. Yep. Then we had like the PCs, and then we had like laptop and phones and created the internet. Now we are passing the stage of so-called internet, so computer hobbyists now are similar to what people did in the genomics back in 2000 and whatnot. And we finished the Human Genome Project, $3.8 billion, 13 years, amazing accomplishment. But like none of us can wait 13 years and $3.8 billion to figure out if our cancer is curable or not. And then that has advanced quite a bit. A lot of advancement happened over the past decade. The cost of a genome got reduced, but still the cost of the machine to be able to provide it is pretty expensive. So there's like three costs when it comes to the world of sequencing. One is a CapEx, capital instrument cost. One is OpEx, every time you run the machine. Mm-hmm. And the third is cost per sample. To get a good cost per sample today, you still have to buy $1 million machine. And you have to spend $50,000 to $60,000 of a cost per run. Then you get something you hear about $1,000 a genome. But if you use anything cheaper, and those areas, the cost per sample goes massively higher. And that's really make it toward very centralized solutions. Now, if you can really operate in a box that is less than $10,000, and it would be as distributed as the one that I have in my lab, and every time you want to run it, it's only a few hundred bucks, and the cost per sample is still very attractive, similar to those machines, now opens up a complete new opportunity. And to me, that's enabling so-called Internet of Genomics, more than just PC of genomics. Because for Internet, you need to have many, many nodes of data collection and standardizing that field. So it's very exciting to be able to look at it from that standpoint. And that when it comes to the design, that's the way that you're looking at what really, again, I'm a so-called outsider to the field, even though the past 15 years has been pretty fun.
I think
right?
you're an insider now. Give yourself credit.
By now.
Yeah. You don't have your PhD. I mean, we'll let that one slide. But.
Well, so I would say that from the standpoint of we're looking at it from what really customers care about. I think customers, they don't care about like, what's your name, where you're coming from, what's your technology. They care about how much they pay, what is the quality, performance, accuracy, and third, how ease of use or accessibility you bring to the table, user interface effectively. And that's the three things that we really put as the key factors when we're designing the first version or the future versions that we're really focusing on. So based on that, we move forward.
So is that a successful product if it looks like that projector there? Or does it need to look like a baby R2-D2 to really kind of make a market for itself?
Yes. So effectively, the size, it was not really well, let me put it this way. We never designed for the size aspects to really put that as a first priority. The first aspects was the quality and performance. We wanted to make sure that on that one, we can beat or meet gold standard or can beat it. The second was the cost. I think, again, to make it affordable is really the key. Then if you can have it compact, if you can have it portable, that enables a lot of additional opportunities for accessibility. Because with these, you can have a depot model, and you can like simply say, like, if there's a problem, we'll solve it on the phone. And if you cannot solve it on the phone with the customer support, you just ship it back. We'll send you the next one in the morning. So it's like turning a sequencer to a shaver.
Gotcha.
And I think that enables like a much easier adoption for people to not be afraid of these. And again, the moment that this get to that size or get bigger, there's a like also wow factor for people to not. I mean, people get scared of the refrigerator-sized machine because it's pretty scary. With these one, like it's very difficult to get scared of.
Yeah, no, it's not very scary at all, even up close. Let's talk about Tablo, because I mean that's another thing where I think and I know you weren't at the company at the time, but was the intention to always get it to be the size of a dorm fridge, to be this almost consumer-friendly device, and to make it less intimidating than standard dialysis?
Absolutely. I think it was kind of like one of the driving principles of the original design, right? And in fact, it's probably one of the reasons why the company at the time did not go with the traditional MassDevice designer firms. They went to a completely different space, consumer products, right? People that were designing, the iWatch or whatever other consumer product, right? So it's a different approach. And I think in that sense, we call it the non-intimidating factor, right? That you can feel that the system is approachable, that you can learn it, how to operate. I mean, you can learn how to operate it. And in fact, you could be probably motivated, right, to bring this system home, right, and actually at your leisure perform your treatments on as needed basis. I think that was kind of like the basic, the original principle.
So did the design of the Tablo open up markets that you hadn't initially anticipated? Because I know that you had thoughts about being in clinics and things like that. What has the smallness and the lack of intimidation, what opportunity has that opened up for Outset?
So back in those days, the company was born as Home Dialysis Plus. So I think one of the reasons why the system was designed the way it was designed was with the intent of taking the therapies home with the patient and have allow them to operate with a system they felt comfortable with. What we were not anticipating is that the hospitals and the clinics had very similar needs, right? They actually didn't necessarily want to deal with a more complex device that takes 2 or 3 times to learn to operate for a population of clinicians that has high turnover rates, right? That's a real problem out there. So I think we were not anticipating that that platform, originally intended for home, would actually be so attractive for clinical, for other service providers like the clinics and the hospitals, right? And in the clinics, I think the big realization there was that they could actually start a clinic without a major investment in water purification infrastructure, without a background. I mean, now you open the opportunity to do dialysis on retail. You could operate out of a strip mall. I mean, you could have your systems in operation probably within 2 or 3 months, right? Including the refurbishing of the space, as opposed as 9 to 12 months when you are starting a clinic, right? And you need the background, you need the qualifications, etc., right? So that cuts probably by 2/3 the lead time to start a clinic. right? In the US, we have probably around 6,300 dialysis clinics, right? And there are like 300 new clinics started every year. So again, that became kind of like a big attracting point for them.
So how do you go out with a plan, you anticipate your device is going to be used in a place, and then suddenly the customers come back to you with this whole other potential opportunity for uses that you hadn't even anticipated. How do you adjust for that? I mean, you in some cases you kind of want to stick to your plan, but you also don't want to leave opportunities unpursued. How do you not get lost in all the sort of new opportunities that are made available to you? How do you adjust to the market telling you that there might be a better opportunity for your product?
Right. So I think we were always surrounded and led by people that had kind of like the interest of the company in the mid and long term, right? So rather than realize the home solution and exit, right? I think that early on we realized that we had the opportunity to develop a business, a much more holistic business around dialysis provision, if we were to wait a little bit more, right? And I think this can only happen when you have a syndicate of investors that have like mid and long-term expectations, right? Otherwise, could be conflicting. So we've been fortunate enough to assemble that type of investor, right? So I think that it was not a huge challenge for us to convince the group that through additional funding, we could actually increase our total addressable market in a very material way.
And I just wanted to follow up also on the patients, the people who require dialysis. Was this something that they were anticipating, or is this almost kind of the release of the iPhone where everyone was suddenly like, I don't even know I wanted it, but now that I see it, I have to have it?
I think we call it the feel-good factor, right? And we haven't deciphered yet if there's any functional aspect of the machine that makes people feel better when they use Tablo, but people do report on occasion that they feel better. My own theory is that the simple fact of you taking ownership of your therapy, not being at the mercy of a clinic schedule or a clinician attitude, that does a lot for you, right? And I think that today, if you are at the mercy of the clinic, and if you miss one of your treatments, you have 3 allowances per week. If you miss one of those, chances are that you're not going to be able to recover that treatment that particular week, and that's going to lead to symptoms and probably a degradation over time that's going to make you feel not good, right? If you have availability to a system like Tablo, and if we have that system at home, basically you could do this at your own schedule. Now, if you have Tablo on retail, imagine rather than taking an Uber cab, I mean, you're just trying to locate the next area with the Tablo available in the next 3 hours. And again, just at your own availability, just go there, go through the treatment, and go back home. So again, you break that tie with a very rigid schedule, right? And I think that drives self-motivation to maintain, to stay on schedule, to stay compliant with your therapy, which eventually leads you to become perhaps eligible for an organ transplant, which is the ultimate goal, right, of this system.
Maybe you'll put the Tablo in the Uber. How's that?
Well, there you go. This is the 2-in-1, right?
We've got about 10 minutes. I see a question in the back.
You just spoke about what efforts in the design phase do you work toward speeding up the time for dialysis?
So time for dialysis is kind of like an interesting, there are two schools of thought there, right? One is the traditional, right, which is throughput, right? The shorter the dialysis time, the better. The question is, the better for who? Is it better for the provider, or is it better for the patient? And there's a second school of thought, which is actually, if you slow down dialysis, actually you minimize the probability of the patient reacting or entering in shock, right? If you're extracting a lot of fluids and other things that are critical for the patient, right? So we operate on the second school of thought, right? So for us, speed or throughput was not necessarily the main goal. Our goal was to achieve clearance and to enable the patient to take ownership of their therapy, right? Again, 10 years ago, the emphasis was on the speed. So the big players would probably do anything to shave 10 minutes of therapy, right? Going from 4 hours to 3.5 hours to perhaps 3 hours, etc. And there was an emphasis on increasing the speed, the pumps, the microfluidics, etc. And again, I felt that now we're at a point in which we are challenging that concept, right? Maybe less at a slower pace is better for the patient than fast throughput aimed to maximize the capacity of the clinics, right? I don't know if that answer your question?
Yeah, I would think that a patient would have a hard time maintaining a schedule because of the time that it's from their schedule. But I suppose that they've already sort of addressed that. So making it more portable and accessible is probably a better way to solve that problem.
Yes. Yeah. Yes.
So I'm curious, with your device, it's out in the market, what do you anticipate the response being? Are you expecting the unexpected in that suddenly this is going to become something that we had no idea that facility would even want this sort of device? How are you looking forward?
Sure. I mean, we already have been quite amazed by several of the responses. Actually, what we did, we opened up an online access that people could sign up for our device for either early access or in the line. And we already got like a very large number of leads interested in our systems. And when we did actually follow up interviews and trying to get the voice of customers with that, etc. And we were quite amazed by the type of the response and actually the type of applications. We had a marine biologist who was saying that, like, I would like to really study the work that I'm doing on the boat, and I did not have the option. I mean, it just makes no sense for me to be able to send it back and then wait for that. We got a call from one of these major food companies. They're saying that we have trucks of food coming from Canada border. We cannot verify the safety or origin of the food. And then today, sending these samples out to a central lab and getting the data result back in 3 months does not work because by then the food is bad. And we need something so-called field placeable and portable to be able to get the data back. We got interest from people who are dealing with infectious disease, like sepsis is one of them. You have an extremely short period of time to really make a decision if this is the case for the patient or not and do the proper action around that one. They're like 16 hours. The problem in the current setting of the legacy technologies is that not only this device is $1 million and it's $60,000 that you have to run it, but actually to make it economical for cost per sample, you have to collect a lot of samples. And that means a very long turnaround time. When you're dealing with a stage 3, a stage 4 cancer patient that needs to really select on the type of the medications that they need to get, 3 to 4 months is a time that they do not have. And, being able to really solve that problem by localizing, by decentralizing, by being able to provide the answer in the next day at the latest is a game changer reality. The truth is that I'm actually amazed by the fact that, again, coming from electronic and engineering background, a lot of my friends are coming from engineering field, and a lot of them are asking questions of like, what is this genomic for? Like, why you have to read your DNA? And by the way, like, if you read it once, do you need to read it again? And it was quite amazing to say that, well, first of all, what we know as cancer is DNA disease. So, like, various type of cancers is starting with it. That's effectively mutation in DNA. But actually, the type of diseases that we're dealing with, way beyond cancers, like infectious diseases, cardiovascular diseases, diabetes, et cetera, they're all having one way or the other of the genetic, aspects that is very important to really be able to look at them. And second, yes, actually, our DNA is changing quite routinely. That's why at the age of like 18 or 20, we may not have cancer, but at the age of 65, we may have cancer. That means actually we are developing through cell division and the mutations happening during lifetime. It's not all inherited. So you actually have to monitor in a quite routine basis. And the truth is that, like, the applications of genomics and DNA sequencing is almost unlimited. We got a professor in Mexico, started a tequila company, wanted to really look at the biome, microbiomes of the genome, because of actually the wine industry is all about like what is the percentage of different microbiomes you're combining, and that's all about genomics. And this is stuff that we were quite amazed when we heard about it. And then we already have the instruments in some of the leading labs in the US, from National Cancer Institute to many other ones. And we've been pretty impressed by the type of applications that we were trying to get the voice of customer and thinking about it. But until we directly heard from the customer and dealt with the instrument and felt about, wow, actually this is good for validation of that because of there's a specific regulations I need to do that, or I would love to do it for this specific infectious disease that otherwise I couldn't do it. And the short answer is absolutely yes.
That's great. That's great. Finally, sure, we got a couple of big questions. Okay, I've got a few more, but please over there, right closer to me.
You're talking to me, right? Yeah. We have basically gave both internally and second through collaboration and third through independent labs who got the machine and has been testing it. So there are, in the whole world, there's only very few companies or few options that are offering DNA sequencing platform to read the DNA. We're talking about less than finger of one hand. And only effectively 3 of them have like so-called the accuracy, the raw sequencing accuracy. So the gold standard on that is very much well known over there. And these various labs or through collaborations, they have been testing different type of samples. For example, FFPE tissue cancer samples that they have run it on the so-called the legacy technology, which they find as a gold standard. They're running in the ddPCR, which is like measuring it exactly, and they're running in our system. And they did comparative studies and shown the performance of the system. We have done it, or they have done it through the fresh frozen or blood sample or microbiome sample. There's a whole range of variety of samples that they have tested the performance of the system. The good news about DNA sequencing is that it's not like a drug that you have to wait for all efficacy results to come out. You put a piece of a DNA in it, or like in a range of DNA, and actually read it right there, and you have the data. And you put the same piece of DNA on a different machine, and you get the data, and you can compare them. And so the truth comes out very quickly from can you read it accurately or not? And you can do the comparative studies. And we have tested. At the end of the day, when you come to the DNA, DNA is DNA, but you're basically doing the different corner case testing by, is a human DNA, is a, with the repeated regions, like what is the source of samples, how degraded is that one? And we have been testing it, and to date, we've been pretty amazed by both the performance. In fact, actually in several areas, we have shown that, for example, for mutation detection recently, in some of the news that Tom also referred to, some of the leading national labs in genomics have been using our machine, and they have shown that actually the performance of mutation detection is across the board outperforming the legacy technologies, which was quite amazing. I mean, we were guessing that, but seeing it in a third-party hand, that was quite rewarding for us. Did I answer the question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to follow up one more question. Unfortunately, we have 2 more minutes, and part of this conversation was centered around how are you going after the entrenched players, real quickly in under a minute. How are the existing dialysis companies dealing with you? How are you dealing with them? How are they receiving Tablo? Do they see it as competition, as a novelty? What's that dynamic like?
So it's collaboration and competition at the same time, right? I'll give you an example. There's one of the biggest players in the dialysis space. He's both an equipment manufacturer and a provider of dialysis services, right? So we have kind of like 2 separate conversations with this company, right? One is with respect to the equipment manufacturing arm of this company. I think that initially we're perceived as a curiosity, right? And maybe that has evolved, and maybe we're now much more of a concern, maybe / opportunity, right? To accelerate development internally. So the conversation is active. On the other side, when we talk to the provider of services, right? I think that they see in our platform kind of like a vehicle to simplify workflows and eventually reduce the lead time and the cost associated with managing the systems, right? So I think that's kind of like an example. The other example could be one in which the customer. This is the second player in the U.S. They don't do equipment manufacturing or design. They only provide services. And again, they are very interested in enabling their clinics to become kind of like the starting point for home programs, right? And they do see our system kind of like the front runner when it comes to making it simple for a patient at home to use a dialysis machine, right? So in that sense, it's also collaboration and an enabler for launching home programs in their existing, 2,500 clinics in the U.S. So that's kind of like a couple of examples there.
And how about you, Hesaam, real quick? How is the testing industry seeing that little device?
So I think in general, the first response, we were getting was like, first of all, there was a lot of skepticism that like, wow, is it possible? There is such a monopoly out there, and there's how we can really make something that happening there. And then when they see the data, especially when they see the third parties data, or basically going to there was an American Society of Human Genetics a month and a half ago that these leading technology and the leading genome centers in the world have used the machine and have shown the data, and they are independent from the company. That was like, oh wow, if these and that national lab or genome centers have been able to generate these data, that's quite amazing. And then when they're trying to get their hand on it, they're actually quite excited. When they're hearing about the attribute of the system, there's a lot of excitement. I think that with normally they wanted to get one or two machines, do the testing themselves, and see that, okay, well, if the performance and the other aspects is the level that they really think about, they would like to switch, so-called. But by definition, there's entering to quite a bit of a monopoly out there requires a lot of innovative approaches to get these various labs on board. I think there's a great level of readiness. I mean, the field is very much ripe for alternative, and also it has not been moving as fast as they deserve to have. We believe in the word that every researcher or every clinician has a DNA sequencer. This is such a powerful technology that they need to have access to genomics, and then I think that can be enabled. We actually have seen massive interest also from emerging markets that they cannot, by any measure, they don't have NIH to give them $1 million to buy a machine. And then thinking about they can advance biology and research with that one, it was quite amazing.
Excellent. All right, well, that is our complete panel. Can't wait to see where these devices are in 5 years. I think we're going to really see some real changes to how care is delivered and how tests are conducted. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.